All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We are excited to kick off. I know we've gotten a couple down here in the new year, but the new year is getting exciting. So I am joining from a different location today, and I wanted to explain that real quick. We'll bring in Mr. Andrew Muller, who's here with me this morning. And you know what? I'm sitting up in the American History and the Biography room, one of the rooms of the library here at the Phyllis Schlafly Center. In fact, we have two libraries. If you're not familiar, the Rosalind Cress Haley Library is also here. A powerhouse Republican, a woman from Texas who was good friends with Phyllis, donated her library to be housed here at the center. But, you know, as we talk about all the things that are happening in Congress, as we talk about the debt ceiling, which is something we want to talk about today, as we talk about foreign policy, the different things, one thing that it's nice to realize as I sit here in the midst of this room and look around some of these books, there's so many towering figures of American history, especially presidents and past congressional leaders. There is a long and storied history of governing that we have. There is a long and storied history of doing the right thing by our people and doing the right thing by our allies across the globe. And financial irresponsibility has never been a part of that. In fact, it's interesting if you go back and read some of the accounts, especially through the first 3 or 4 presidencies, as we were just becoming established in the world, this laboring over what we can afford to do, basic things like building a navy and different, no brainers now. It's interesting to see compared to today. It feels very interesting to watch because money is just spent willy-nilly. It's printed freely. And as a result, we get to arguments like we're having today about the debt ceiling, which is very confusing for most of us, including us. And that's why there are two of us here today to talk about such a thing. So I'm joined by Mr. Andrew Muller from his remote location. I'm remote here in the building. We're running around doing our respective things, but we wanted to get together and talk about the debt ceiling this week. And I actually have a couple other comments. I want to throw in a couple other topics that we're going to cover as well. But Andrew, how are you doing this week?
Doing great. It's cold, it's wet, but it's not raining money. It doesn't seem like it is, at least not yet.
It's
Uh,
not raining money. I tell you what, though, if we were in Switzerland, it is raining bad ideas for the state to impose over its people. But that's a good. Well, I guess instead of waiting till the end, let's say that first. If anyone's paying attention, the elites of the world, including some of our very own illustrious U.S. politicians, have gathered in Davos, Switzerland. They are at the World Economic Forum, which is taking place there. And it is, if you, we could go into a lot of it, but we don't have to. There are a lot of good sources that are talking about and covering it. Jack Posobiec is one, and then from his Twitter or Telegram feeds, you will find tons of other channels talking about it. If you want to know what's around the bend, for instance, one of the interesting things I saw this week was on a panel hosted by one of the disgraced former CNN hosts. There were a couple of folks from the European Union and a couple of folks from American government who said essentially to a very, now, of course, you want to make yourself look really important and smart when you're on the stage, I'm sure, but they seemed fairly confident that free speech or hate speech, criminal laws, more of them were coming very soon to the United States that would look very similar to things that we see in Europe. Oh, yeah, well, that's something soon to be a reality in the US as well. And it kind of, you look across the spectrum of these things and say, what do you know that I don't know? Why does this seem so assured to you? So if you want to know the really bad stuff coming right around the corner, thank you to radical Marxists and progressive leftists. Look no further than the Davos news headlines this week, because we will see what is imminent for America, I assure you. So Andrew, do you have anything to tack on? Anything specific from the WEF Summit this week that people should maybe keep an eye on, other than just we should acknowledge it and tell everyone that's going on, even though we have our own stuff here that we've been talking about?
Nothing specific. It's just these elitist globalist clowns. They don't really care about anything other than getting to global governance. And this is what it's all about. And climate change, I know that's a big discussion there. Greta Thunberg's there right now with a bunch of her cronies. And essentially, the idea is we're going to use climate change, we're going to use ESG, economic social governance, as a harbinger, as a Trojan horse to bring about globalism. And that's all these guys want to do. They have absolutely no care for the little people and communities and any sort of idea of self-government or state sovereignty. It's just about globalism. So say no to globalism, say no to Marxism, and that's really all that comes out
Yeah.
of the World Economic Forum and this Davos summit.
Yeah, the only good thing I saw come out was during a panel. I saw two U.S. senators, Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, were sitting there and they were having a conversation. I forget who it was. Someone said, I think Chris Coons, I forget who was down at the other end of the panel, made a comment about, that we agree on this, even though we don't agree on the filibuster. And before he could move on, Kirsten Sinema said, yeah, that's right. And then she and Joe Manchin high-five each other on stage for opposing their fellow Democrats in opposing removing a filibuster to protect the minority party. I was like, well, that's a good thing. I'm happy to see this. But you mentioned in the effort of shameless self-promotion, before we move into our main topic, just like Greta Thunberg, who, if you haven't seen it, go watch her fake arrest from this week. The staged photos and the video that accompany it are just absolutely priceless. Also, I think well, never mind. I won't. That won't be nice. I'm not going to say that. I don't think she's going to have as much of an effective place in the world as she will when she was younger. That's all I'll say. But in the effort of being just like Greta and having shameless self-promotion, don't forget, like, share, and subscribe wherever you are. Hit that button right now if you're on YouTube, subscribe button, and the notification bell. Make sure you don't miss out on anything. And please, whether you're on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, leave us a comment. Commenting actually has more to do with our algorithms than almost everything else combined, all the other metrics. So leave us a comment, hop into the chat, leave comments afterward, just like where we're going to go and post a lot of the links that we're talking about here as we dive into it. So like, share, and subscribe. Make sure you're following. Share it with a friend today. And let's get to it. The U.S. debt ceiling. What in the world is it, and what do we do about it? Everyone has argued over it today. And, well, all I'll say, and then I want Andrew to give a little bit of history. First of all, there is not something big and scary that comes crashing down today. Whenever you see the headlines across news that say what could happen, first of all, if they say could, just close that tab. They're fear-mongering, pure and simple. But if you look at all the things that can happen, the number one thing you'll notice is that if Congress doesn't raise the debt ceiling today, tomorrow we don't default on our debt. In fact, there's just a counting timeline down to June where some decisions have to be made about funding. And this is our real opportunity to now negotiate over spending. Instead of just raising the debt ceiling, essentially what we're doing is kicking off the discussion about spending over the next few months. It's not that we're going to default anything. We now have a few months to figure out several things. So what is this, Andrew? What is this timeline that kicks off till June? What is our opportunity to do here? You want to give us a little bit? I know you've got some history pulled up, and I'm going to go look for a couple other things as well.
Yeah, the big thing is really, this is a decision they have to make in June. So they have until June to make the decisions, because the debts are going to start to default and there's going to be issues if they don't decide to address it or raise the debt ceiling by then. But really, why it's in the headlines is because Kevin McCarthy, who of course is the new House Speaker and Majority Leader of the Majority Party, has come out and said, you know what? I don't think we're going to raise the debt ceiling. I don't want to raise the debt ceiling. It's a bad idea. And that has created this just shockwave throughout the political system, because it's like, what? We've always raised the debt ceiling. This is something we've always done. And it's never been an actual action item where, hey, this actually might happen, other than just a campaign promise. I pulled up the debt clock on my phone, and I know Ryan has it too. The U.S. national debt's at $31 trillion right now. Just to kind of put that into perspective, to pay that off, it would cost $94,000 per citizen, $246,000 per taxpayer. It's an extraordinary amount of money. It's crazy. And if you go and click the link, usdebtclock.org, you'll be able to see that itemized. It's a crazy figure. But also, just a little history behind the United States Congress and debt. I also have another little piece called Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. And this is Congress's job list, right? The congressional job list. And you'd think it's an incredibly long, enumerated, crazy listing of tasks and monies that they can spend. But really, it's only 428 words. It's short. And it says that Congress can coin and appropriate money. They can create debt. And borrow on the credit of the United States, but it's all in the context of war, national defense, and in time of emergency. It's never in the context of all these crazy things we're spending billions and trillions of dollars on. So if we would go back to Article 1, Section 8, which is hopefully what Kevin McCarthy's doing, and say, you know what, we can't raise the debt ceiling. And I heard Speaker McCarthy say this on the House floor this week. If you had a teenager and gave them a credit card with a $500 limit, and they maximized the limit and maybe went over it, would you as a parent say, you know what, I'm going to extend that to $1,000? Or would you say, you know what, maybe this isn't a problem with the limit, it's a problem with your philosophy behind how you spend money. It's a behavioral issue. So you help them pay off the debt and you teach them a lesson. The exact same thing has to happen with government. these people in Congress are not capable of responsibly spending the United States taxpayers' dollar. And you know what? Enough is enough. Don't raise the debt ceiling. Let's balance the budget just with
Yep.
Congress. We don't need an amendment to the Constitution to do that. Let's balance the budget. Let's cut spending and let's start paying off this debt. And that's really the long and short of it. And I hope Kevin McCarthy will follow through with this because it hasn't happened in my memory. And I don't know if it's ever happened, Ryan, if we've ever said, you know what, we're not raising the debt ceiling.
And see, that's actually, I am currently looking for that. That was something we talked about before we went live on air here. I'm not sure there's a time when, at least when in our modern recollection, when we haven't raised the debt ceiling, when this argument has come around, because the two things that we always hear that, and I think this is, let me say, this is why this conversation is so important for conservatives to have, because there are two things that come to mind I can think of, that especially being in the realm of conservative activists. So I always see people who are out there. We have to make sure Congress doesn't do this. Congress doesn't do this. Congress doesn't do this. But why? No one seems to be educated on what this is all connected to, how it matters, how we got here, and what it actually means to start saying no and getting out of it. And those two things are always raising the debt ceiling. Everyone, the news, the left, the Democrats frantically set their hair on fire. We must raise the debt ceiling. And the other one is we must continue funding the government, which is where we end up with all these continuing resolutions instead of actually putting down a budget every year. And we keep funding at the current. So it's actually kind of funny. This is one of the arguments I've seen turned around. Hey, all we want to do is continue funding the government. So instead of raising the debt ceiling, let's just lock in and limit spending to fiscal year 2022 levels. We'll just keep doing that, right? Oh, that's not how it works this time. Oh, that's funny, Democrats. It's very interesting. So it really, there's a good chance for hypocrisy. But this conversation needs to be had amongst people like you and me to figure out, what in the world does this actually mean? What's it all connected to? And then what do I need to go and ask my congressman to do? Because as we have now established, it really actually doesn't take all that much to shift a congressman's vote to make them feel pressure when you can flood their office with a few thousand phone calls and emails. And it really doesn't take that many congressmen to hold up the entirety of one half of our federal legislature. And we're going to keep doing this over and over again until we get what we want. We just saw that. Kevin McCarthy is fresh off of that reality in his life, and it looks like he is behaving accordingly. He knows there's accountability from the conservative wing of the party that are not just going to tolerate going along. And there's, as we've discussed in the last couple of weeks, some serious ramifications if he breaks promises that he has made to them to deal with some of these issues. So guess what? This is the time for conservatives now to have this kind of discussion, to look back at, like I made a reference to before, look back across the spectrum of U.S. history and the people who've led us and decide, what do we need to do? What do we need to ask for? What policies need to be changed? Go and tell my congressman those specific things, and then have them go into the halls of Congress and hold the hard line on these issues. We got to have this discussion and educate ourselves. Otherwise, Congress just keeps doing what they're going to do. So to your point, I don't think we've ever not raised the debt ceiling, but a good one. And by the way, I have to shut down the U.S. national debt clock because it takes up my RAM like a monster over here on the computer. It really is incredible. But I mean, one of the big things you look at, we keep raising the debt ceiling, and this is talking downstairs. It's maybe oversimplifying, but for anyone who doesn't know what this means, basically what you're doing is you're just calling in and raising your credit card limit. Instead of actually dealing with the issue, you're just raising your credit card limit over and over again and spending more and more and more. Well, guess what? The key things that are the key issue here, it's not even the total number of debt. When you see U.S. national debt, $31.4 trillion, right below it, U.S. federal spending official. And then, you code through the rest of this and find the U.S. federal tax revenue, that big number, the issue, 1.3 billion, right? Billion? We got hundreds, thousands, millions, billions, trillions. Sorry, 1.3 trillion. Man, they move so fast, even I've lost track, and I do this every day. $1.3 trillion federal deficit. What that means is we are taking in $4.6 trillion in revenue every year. So if your family took in 4.6 trillion a month, we're going to let's Dave Ramsey this. This is what I was talking about. We need a 9-point baby steps plan for Congress. Someone needs to come up with this. I have a feeling that I'm going to be asking you to find me some economics people. We're going to talk about this. You're taking in, let me get back to my debt clock, $4.6 trillion a month, but you're spending $6 trillion a month. Well, you can keep raising your credit card limits, but as long as you keep doing this, and there's almost $4 trillion that you're spending that you don't have, what's that going to get us? Nothing. We're not fixing the problem. Raising the debt limit only lets us keep doing the same problem over again rather than facing the consequence and changing it. So if you want to know what do we do, well, there are really two things here. If you want, like today, what can my congressman do? What do I need to tell them? Call them and say, vote again. Well, do not vote to raise the debt ceiling. And then take your opportunity with this deadline to make some serious spending cuts. I mean, serious spending cuts. There's stuff that has to go because the reality is we're spending money that we don't have. And we could get into the conversation about if the money that we have even is money because of not being based on a standard. But we don't have to go all the way down the Ron Paul road of economics today. That's a big way to go down. But I mean, there's
gold and silver. Look into it.
It is gold and silver and Bitcoin. I'm right. Cryptocurrency is in there. No, I'm
right.
kidding. I don't think it is. But
well, let me add something to the calling the congressman and allowing them to, or not allowing them, asking them, urging them to cut spending. I shot you an article from the New American. Kevin McCarthy keeps promises, puts Freedom Caucus members on committees. Kevin McCarthy appointed people who even voted against him in the House speakership election. Very key committees. House Financial Services Committee. We got Andrew Clyde of Georgia. We got Michael Cloud of Texas. Some really good folks on there. Byron Donalds of Florida, who of course ran against Kevin McCarthy in the speakership. He's on the House Financial Services Committee with Ralph Norman of South Carolina. And then even the House Oversight Committee. Some really important stuff here. You have Lauren Boebert, Scott Perry, and Byron Donalds is also on that. So some really good stuff happening with Kevin McCarthy keeping his promises and putting Freedom Caucus conservative members on committees that actually make some of these key important decisions and move items on the agenda to cut spending. Kevin McCarthy's followed through with that, which I didn't know if he would, but he is, and got to give praise where praise is due. And he's appointing these guys who even voted against him. And that's a principled statement approach that I appreciate, that I didn't necessarily expect from Kevin McCarthy, but it proves, like Ryan said, these small group of congressmen, which we talked about so much in past weeks, stood out and held the line and made this happen. And I think it could be the single act that makes this 118th Congress, effective.
Yeah.
So huge.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'll say, because again, like we could go on forever and ever about this. I guess let's let this be a starting place, and then there may be an opportunity here because it sure looks like they're not going to have a vote on debt ceiling today. I mean, that's so we get a few months to have this discussion. The name of the game, people want to know, what does it mean? What does it mean? I really, there are a lot of different directions you could go down, but the name of the game is stop raising the limit and start looking at spending. We have to slash the spending because there's no need to raise the debt limit if you don't continue to spend more than you have. If we bring the spending down, it's just like, it really is like, if you think of it in terms of your family budget, it's the same thing. If part of your budget is paying off debt, but you're still spending more than you have to bring that number down into the right proportion. And then we can keep paying off the debt that we have, stop adding to the debt. And then we have to figure out what to do with the rest of our money. Well, that just means we can't do, no more vacations, no more non-defense discretionary spending. And that's, I know these are some of the two main things. Everyone says, well, what do you want us to do? You're not going to raise the debt ceiling. Then what is it we're supposed to do, you ridiculous conservative Republicans? Everyone says, well, okay, two things to start. Limit spending to fiscal year 22 levels, and limit non-defense discretionary spending, meaning just basically non-defense spending, not the mandatory stuff, but non-defense discretionary spending to pre-COVID levels. Because if you look the last 2-3 years under two different administrations, it just balloon popped. We started just willy-nilly, $3.6 trillion spent on these handouts and this and that and the other. It got crazy. Okay, let's just go back to this point first. You want to know what we should do? These two things. And then let's start looking at the numbers and see, okay, first of all, stop the insanity of the last 2 years. And then let's take a look and see what else, because you have to start cutting. Well, we're not going to do this program anymore. Well, we're not going to have that many employees anymore. Well, we're not going to add this new planned thing anymore. That's really honestly what it takes. This is a fight about, about spending. And we can't even have the fight about spending if we just continue to raise the credit card limit and move on with our lives. There's no discussion about bringing spending into line. Well, there is. It's just, 2 years down the road when we do this dance all over again. So Spending is the name of the game.
And the point could be made, Ryan. What do you cut? How do you cut? How do you even start this with all the money that we've spent? It's really, really simple. Like I said earlier, call your congressman and ask them to read and
Yeah.
consider Article 1, Section 8. It's so incredibly specific, even down to establishing post offices and post roads. This is what Congress can spend money on, and this is what they can do. And if they would just go back and use that as the rubric, and to Dave Ramsey this thing, you know what? We're going to sell our Bugatti and start driving a Honda Civic and eat beans and rice instead of going to
Yeah.
Qdoba every day. It's just like how you would budget for your family. We need to go
Yeah.
back to what are the essentials, and the founders specified those expenditures in Article 1, Section 8, and that's the remedy. That's the true heart of the problem, is
Yeah.
constitutional fidelity, to go back to it and say, yes, this is it. This is the grocery list of what we need and what we can spend, and that would fix all of these problems.
And see, this is one of the really neat opportunities to talk, because we end up having conservative administrations, supposedly conservative administrations, come in and don't go far enough, nearly far enough. Even if you do kind of the Trump thing, the art of the deal, ask for a whole lot more than you're ever going to get. But in the sake of for the sake of getting further down the road than we would have initially in our communications, this is where there are some things that should be wholesale considered about, cutting, slashing, burning, moving around, and maintaining the same core functions of government without all the bloated bureaucracy. This is the golden opportunity to talk about all of those things. And this is the golden opportunity for your congressman to get bold about that. And instead of just saying we need to rein in the IRS, how about get rid of the IRS and send those essential functions, what is needed, back to the Department of the Treasury? How about we get rid of the ATF, which has just become massive and bloated, and give some of the core functions back to just the Department of Justice? How about we eliminate the Department of Education and do nothing? Just let that one die and go back to the states. There's my 9-point plan. If you get rid of DOE, IRS, and ATF, I've just saved us a bunch of money. But these are the times to have those serious conversations about, but what does it actually look like if we slash and burn? And the more that we talk about that, the more that I hate to say desensitize, but the more that you normalize that discussion for people, everyone comes along and says, well, in 4 years, okay, well, we're not going to eliminate the IRS, but maybe it really is time that we audit the Federal Reserve and take a look at these things that have been crazy for a long time. If we use now as a negotiating tactic to ask for some of the real slash and burn things that you and I and Chip Roy and a lot of the others know has to be done, if we normalize those conversations, in a few years, we actually may get some of the easy stuff that they never want to do. This is a real art of the deal moment for us to be able to understand what to ask our congressman for our congressmen to understand what they should ask of their caucus. Because to your point, Kevin McCarthy, is good for him. He is playing well. He is following along with what he said he would do. And I think that is a testament to how it only takes a few to maneuver, and then a good few measures of accountability that are well thought. You can keep the whole party in line. It's not that we're always going to win every policy argument, the 20 conservatives, but they get to make sure they're not just run roughshod, over them. So this is a real serious opportunity to talk about the slash and burn stuff that might sound nutty, but as you pointed out, it's just that simple. Go back and let's read Article 1, Section. What's it say? What does it say? Now, what about all these other things that we're doing? How did we get from there to here? Let's have an honest conversation about that. So, that's my final wrap up thought. And we've got a few minutes. I guess we could maybe hit on a couple of other things, although we've talked a little bit about the two biggies for the week. But that's my final thought. Is this is the opportunity to have the serious conversation. Do not give in to any sort of fear mongering about default. That's not going to happen. The U.S. is not defaulting on their debts. Military members are not going to go unpaid. All the emotional arguments and examples that they always pull up when it comes to continuing resolutions or the debt clock. The debt ceiling. These are just false dilemmas and straw man arguments and all of the logical fallacies in the book they are throwing at you to get you to just do what they want, instead of stop and say, wait a minute, let's think about this for a minute. Because the more you think, the more you look at the debt clock, the more that you look at the numbers and realize, wait a minute, no family could do this without major penalties and consequences coming to bear. How long do we think we as a nation can get away with this? This just doesn't make sense. It is so silly. There's no way I can allow this to continue. Stopping and pausing and thinking about it is what starts today. No crazy things happen with our funding. No crazy things happen with default. All that means is today a timeline starts for the next few months of having to look at spending in a hardcore way. It's time to do that. Ask your congressman to do that at a bare minimum. I am hopeful this is not even going to be an issue because McCarthy's not even going to bring it up. But ask your congressman to take some serious looks at that, because we've got the opportunity, and maybe this is the Congress to finally do it, because there are enough of them to move the whole caucus and say, no, we have to seriously look at this time. I think it's time that might happen. What do you think, Andrew? Is this it? Is this our opportunity to actually start to make some serious changes and turn this RV the other direction off the off the cliff?
I sure pray it is, but I agree with you, Ryan, 100%. We need to start hitting at those big ticket items, like, having those honest conversations. What if we cut these departments? And is that going to happen this 118th session? I don't know. I hope so, but I don't know. Hopefully, it's just the start of the conversation. But we also need to be talking about inflation, and
Mhm.
fiat money and the gold standard, and how do we get back to a legitimate gold-backed dollar? How do we get back to that where money is actually worth its face value? We don't
Mhm.
have to deal with these inflation issues, because you can use these words all you want and throw them against Joe Biden and look at gas prices and use them as a political campaign bullet point. But at the end of the day, the brass tacks of the issue is we have increased spending, departments that don't exist in the Constitution, and a currency that's not backed by anything other than the government's promise that it's worth X. And that's just not worth it anymore. And it's going to cave in on us. So we need
Yeah.
to be shooting high. And you know what? Yeah, we might not get everything we want immediately, but we need to start having those honest conversations about burning and scrapping things that some people can't imagine us living without as a nation, but we'll be okay. And you know what? Like you said, Ryan, a lot of these departments, like the military, and they use Medicare and all these different things as emotional tools where if we don't pass this, people are going to die. No, you'll be able to figure something out. But the root cause of this is
Mhm.
wavering away from this and then not having constitutional monies, gold and silver. So if we can attack those problems and return back to the original meaning of what they were supposed to be, it'll sort itself out.
Mhm.
But it takes having courage to have those conversations, and I hope we can get it done. I think Kevin McCarthy's definitely heading in the right path, and I think we need to
Mhm.
praise him where praise is due, and now is certainly time to do so.
Absolutely. Like Phyllis always said, hold the bad guys' feet to the fire and praise the good guys when they do the right thing.
Yep,
Kevin McCarthy is doing the right thing. He needs to hear from us, even if we weren't the fans, even if we wish there was a different speaker. Now is the time for him and all of our congressmen to hear from all of us. Encourage, you are doing the right thing. Don't give in to this.
yep,
That's where we're at. That's it. So, pardon me. This has been a very wide ranging and over the board conversation, because this is no small thing. I was
yep,
talking about that with one of our other colleagues here earlier. It's so hard because you say, well, what should we do about it? Well, you look at me like you're waiting for some 3-point plan to turn around the economics of America. It's been a lot more than 3 points that have gotten us here. But if you look, it's really actually kind of an interesting discussion. I forget where I was. You get on the chart there and see our U.S. national debt and deficit up until about 1972. It running, all the little lines are running about the same, and that chart, that bar graph, just takes off in an absolutely astronomical way in the 1970s. There's a point in history that we should all go look at and start seeing what do we start doing in the 60s that came to bear in the 70s, and in the 70s that came to bear in the 80s, to absolutely astronomically blow the lid off of our US national debt. What happened? And I know that you're going to find all the different specific areas in the world, but it is a multifaceted problem, but it has not been that long in the making. It has really been the last 40, 45 years that this has exploded in the way that it has. So it's time to take a serious look at that and have some real reconsiderations on the whole thing. And like we said, entitle. I love that you start talking about Social Security and Medicare. We always hear entitlements, entitlements, entitlements. You know what? In the U.S. Constitution, I find a few things that we're entitled to, and
yep,
all of those things that I'm entitled to, my life, my liberty, security at the national sovereignty level, these are all being jeopardized by all of these financial entitlements that we've come up with and named entitlements when they're really
yeah,
not. Let's talk about what I'm entitled to by my federal
yeah.
government and what I'm not.
Yeah.
That's a serious conversation to have, and that's what I think we need to demand. So,
And I'll end
the
with this, Ryan. I read this quote today and I thought it was good. I don't remember who said it, but it was the difference between the present generation and the past generation was the present generation, all they talk about is rights and entitlements. And the former generation talked about duties and responsibilities. And if we
Yeah.
would go back to that mindset of duty and responsibility, that by raising this debt, we're not only being irresponsible, but we're stealing from our children and their children, and we're stealing from future generations. And it has an eternal consequence. So we need to go
It
back
does.
to duty and responsibility rather than rights and entitlements.
It does. You're absolutely right. And I mean that right there, we could just go off into it. Well, we could stop right there and hit sermon time and talk about personal responsibility and putting other people first. But I mean, that's it. When you stop putting yourself at the center, not only does your individual behavior change, but as a civil society, things start to change when you are
Yep.
focusing not on yourself and what you have and what you're owed and what you put in and what you need out, but what can I do to make life good now, but especially be responsible and hand even a better life to my kids. When you look at it with that mindset, that changes the whole game of how we govern. So, at
Yep.
the base of it all is that,
That's patriotism.
and that's where you go. That's patriotism. So, I can't think of a better note to end on. I don't really have any other topics that we need to hit this week, and for the sake of time, we should stop. Also, the comment section is quiet. There are a lot of you watching, but I'm not seeing any of the comments in the chat come flying in here. So I guess we'll have to do an Ask Me Anything some other time. We will reveal all of Andrew's personal life if you just comment. Let that be your incentive.
That's right.
Comment in and we'll do an Ask Me Anything with Andrew sometime. So thank you for joining us this week. Thank you for being a part of this every week. I hope that this conversation, rather than being more convoluted as we really kind of started off onto a few rabbit trails and maybe wound our way to the end real quick, I hope it was helpful more than it was confusing, because again, the whole point of these unauthorized caucuses, these are things that often we get to gloss over, or we kind of call our congressman and follow along, but it's so important that as conservatives, like Andrew just said, personal responsibility. I got to take personal responsibility for understanding what is this issue that we're discussing? What is it that I need to contact my representative about? What is my responsibility? Not who's going to do something for me, but what do I need to do for myself and others in this situation? If we take that approach each and every issue and actually dive into it and start to have the conversations and seek out the information, we're going to be in a whole lot better of a place. So let this be a nice launching point for everyone on the U.S. debt and deficit. Congress, if you're listening, don't raise the debt ceiling and go and slash and burn a few different departments that just don't need to exist on their own anymore. And Andrew and I will be very happy, and we might even donate to some campaigns. That's the only quid pro quo I want. Just slash the bureaucracy, and I'll start giving you campaign donations. That's it. I'm happy. So, am I allowed to do that? Is that a quid pro quo? I don't think I really offer anything there. If it is, it's an American quid pro quo, and I'm okay with it. So, with that, I will bid you farewell. Thank you so much on behalf of Andrew and myself as we sit here again in the wonderful Phyllis Schlafly Center. Thank you for supporting us and sharing this content. We'll look forward to seeing you next Thursday for another unauthorized caucus where we will pick apart all of Andrew's personal life and get that comment section flowing. Thank you so much, everyone.